because I don't have any rules to post. I thought I saw something, sorry. Just want to make sure that everything is okay. Okay. So, yeah, let us move on. That is something. Oh, I'm so sorry. I will need to respond to that personally. Um, why do you believe Spinoza is a materialist? 'Cause he is. Just kidding. Yeah. According to Spinoza, the mind is not a physical thing. Okay. Let me clarify, because that is a good point. And I can't remember where I said it. I think I probably said it in one of the INFJ videos, because I agree with RDR Labs that Spinoza is an INFJ. Sorry about all the noise in the background of these crazy students driving at like 40 miles an hour in a parking garage. Anyway, it's, um, what was even the question? Oh, Spinoza. So my notion is that Spinoza, I need to read back up on my Spinoza about how he conceived of the mind, but the whether or not the point with Spinoza is that, at least as I understand him, he reduced everything down to his notion of substance. That there is, basically, if you're going to buy into the notion that everything can be reduced down to a single unified thing, which we'll call substance, an unconditioned substance, a stuff, if you want to call it matter or something that's spiritual. The point is that you could describe it as some form of material, or something. It's a thing, and everything reduces down to it. So I called it materialism because, as far as I'm concerned, even though it's not what you might typically think of as a material, as far as I'm concerned, it's a material. It's a thing. It's a thing. Like, I don't know what else it could be, other than ideas. And I think it's clear that Spinoza was not laying out that this stuff was ideas. He was laying out that it was a substance, and that this included everything was an expression of substance, and everything is deterministically determined, by the substance and the way that it expresses itself, the modifications of it, if you will, or the way that the substance expresses itself. So as far as the mind not being a physical thing, the only thing I could say to that is I need to check to see if have been misrepresenting Spinoza this whole time. But I had been under the impression that the mind for Spinoza, for all intents and purposes, was there, because there's nothing outside of substance. Everything is an expression of substance, because Spinoza he's reducing everything down to what is the bottom line. And for him, it's this notion of substance, which he identifies with God, nature, just simply what is. And the mind is a part of that. And so therefore, if he said the mind is not a physical thing, then I would have to assume that he simply means that substance he does not consider a physical thing, even though, me personally, I don't think that it really matters. I am not at this point. I have come to appreciate and understand better, which is good, but I am not I'm not an Aristotelian thinker. Not naturally anyway, though I've come to appreciate it more, but I struggled immensely to understand even some of the basic concepts of Aristotle, because it was just so kind of, or at least the way it was presented, it was like, what are you people talking about? And that's what annoys me, is when I feel like there's something that's actually relatively simple, but it's being explained by people who just don't know how to explain things. They're not engaging my mind. Oh, this is a lacrosse ball. I use it more in the spring or summertime, and I bounce it up and down so that it helps me to think. Anyway, and just in case you were wondering where the heck this ball came from, I just grabbed it without realizing. So those are my thoughts on Spinoza, more or less. Let's see. That's another one that I'll want to answer. personally. Oh, well, I'm glad you you lost the live. Did you? Sorry. Oh, okay. Yeah, no, I need to respond to you, personally, for now, because it is a very long comment and I'm still kind of processing it. What are your thoughts on INFPs mistyping as INFJs? This is test 1, little X for your profile. Classic question. I've talked a bit about it before. I've attempted on several occasions to try to make clear differentiation. But as far as I talked a bit about it actually in the last, the other video that the other post live stream video that I just did, on the subject, and that I don't think that it should be considered surprising that INFPs and INFJs mistype as each other, because the tests that test for INFP and INFJ, at least the majority of them, if they're based on the Myers-Briggs, then what they're really typing for is those dichotomies, the proposed empirically determinable dichotomies that I've come more and more, perhaps naively, to link up with the Big Five. In my mind, as far as I'm concerned, that's really what they're an expression of. An ungrateful expression of it, gosh dang it, but I digress. I speak where I am no expert. But anyway, so the mistyping should not be surprising, because if you're typing, generally speaking, if you're typing at all, for the most part, you're typing via a Myers-Briggs thing, where you're typing for the dichotomies. And as far as Myers was concerned, the empirical dichotomies, empirically, the only way you could discern between an INFJ and an INFP, that is two people with these very different functions, but as far as what they actually turn out to look like empirically, or measurably, they only differ on the JMP axis. And the JMP axis, I'm inclined to think, without any official research or anything to back me up at this moment, but I'm inclined to think from just what I've heard that the JMP axis is often the weakest thing to test. So of course they're going to get mixed up all the time, because as far as Myers was concerned, how they show themselves externally in a way that can be measured by like a test or a robot, basically. That's what a test is. It's just programming that you're running the person through. There's too many nuances in their expression, and so it becomes very easy to mistype, or rather to through a test to mistype. And also through typing them personally, because we type we're still paying attention to those same things that Myers originally tracked out. The reason she could track them out is because they are easier to see. And the INFP and the INFJ tend to look a lot alike. They're both tend to be more philosophical, or at least they often have a spiritualism to them. Regardless of whether or not they're spiritual or not, they kind of tap into what we think of when we think of something being spiritual. Both of them tend to do that. They both like to write. They're somewhat idealistic. They're sort of idea people. They're kind and all these things, or at least usually are, all these stereotypical things. So I don't think that it should be remarkable. But I do think that, in my experience, there are very important, striking differences between them. And those, I think, the best way that I've described it up till now is, and I might just be thinking that because I'm NISE, and so what I always tend to think that whatever I'm thinking right now is the best formulation. That's not true. That's not quite right. But I think you know what I mean. That changes what I think is best, but I do think that the best way that I have described them... Two people are getting into a car next to me, so sorry if there's some talking. And sorry for the informal quality of the video. I mean, that almost kind of goes without saying. But I wanted to get this done, and this was the best opportunity I had. So let me think here. The best differentiation between INFP and INFJ comes down to the quadras or the temperaments, in my description of those, with the INFJ being more associated with the quote clergy and the INFP being more associated with the merchants. And so INFJ trying to inspire unity to a vision, INFP trying to help or help people become differentiated from the mass. So they're working at completely opposite angles, and so it's kind of funny how they're often get along really well, but then when it comes to the philosophical, there are philosophical differences that can or will eventually cause not even necessarily tension, but misunderstanding or just missed understanding. Like they don't even know what the other person's talking about. And I think that'll often come from the INFP thinking the INFJ tends to be is tending too much towards a kind of totalitarianism. They probably won't think of it that way, but that's essentially what it is. They're two kind of, this sort of a totalitarianism, whereas the INFJ thinks is naively tending towards anarchy and libertinism. So, a moral nihilism, is kind of how they go about it. So, yes, any interest? This is Mystery223 Guy. Any interest in chess personality? So I did, and there's a lot to this particular comment, but I did look up the chess personality. The problem with this question is that although I have played a fair amount of chess very much as an amateur, I'm still not nearly skilled or knowledgeable enough about chess and the skills behind chess to really understand the different chess personalities. Like I could look it up, but I couldn't differentiate them from each other. Because when I say amateur, like I've played chess because I like the sense of strategy. I like to be able to exercise my brain. It's a very good way to do that. But am I good at chess? No, I am not. I think I could beat children at chess, probably, unless the child was good at chess. But I do not consider myself by any stretch of the imagination to be very good at chess. But it is interesting though, because my dad would play chess with me when I was a kid, and he refused. He told me, as now that I'm grown up, that he never did try to quote go easy on me. He always just played at his full skill. And only rarely did he ever sort of allow himself to make a mistake in my advantage. But I think partly because that's just sort of part of how he is, he would struggle to be able to, quote, go easy on me because he doesn't really know how to do that, and I can kind of understand that. Also because that's just, it was almost a compliment to me that he didn't feel like he needed to, even though I don't recall, I only recall beating my father once, and it was kind of more of just a miracle anyway, and I can't quite remember how it went, but I only remember clearly one win. I know I won more than just once, but most of the time my dad would win at strategy games. And I remember it almost being a source of anxiety for me because I was like, I really wanted to beat him. Or at the very least, I wanted to show that I had intellectual prowess. And it never bothered me that he was very difficult to beat because, well, it bothered me, but it didn't bother me that he was difficult to beat. It was just that I had never beaten him. And so it's like, and so I wanted to have that satisfaction, but he wasn't going to give it to me until I actually beat him, which I did a couple of times. And I do think that he's still better at chess than me. But he's done some more studying of it, and he will deny all of this because he's an INTP and he refuses to take compliments. that maybe that's not an INTP thing, but it certainly is with my dad. He does not. It was funny because he and another friend of mine actually they used to play Magic the Gathering regularly, and every time that they would report back to me what their how they had done, as far as I was concerned, they were both always going to spin history in their disfavor to show that the other person had like, man, they just creamed me, and the other person would be like, wow, they just swamped me, like I didn't win any of them. Like both of them would be saying that they lost horribly, and I'm like, okay, one of you must have won more matches because you're both feeling like you were crushed, but I don't understand this. And so it's like anti-Napoleon. It's like creating propaganda that dismisses yourself. Like they're both trying to spin history to be in their disadvantage, and therefore, I guess, in a roundabout Nietzschean way, in their advantage. But anyway, that doesn't really have to do with your question. The answer is that also there's a second part to it. Also, not that I think the two are related. Do you think chess playing style can have some explanations within Jungian psychology in the same way that the board game risk playing style can have some explanations within Jungian psychology? If you decide to take the test, can you give us your chess personality? So I tried to take the test, but I realized very quickly that I didn't understand well enough what the test was. I didn't feel like I could honestly finish it because I could have, but I don't know if it really would have revealed my chess personality because I just haven't. Maybe I ought to take another look at it. Maybe I should have taken another look at it, but because it was giving like examples of positions, and the problem is that I couldn't analyze quick enough or in a way that I considered to be intelligent enough whether or not I actually thought something was to my advantage. Like I could think, for instance, at the moment, well, the black pieces seem to have more control of the middle, and I've been told that's good, and that seems to have worked better for me, but it's like, that's not something that's come from a lot of experience of chess. That's just come from the fact that I'm like as novice as you can get with chess. My problem, though, I do think that it has. I think that Jungian typology most certainly could have effects, or you could find correlations between a person's type and the way that they like to play chess. You could show the, you could, for instance, Magnus Carlsen, I believe, he is currently the #1 world chess player. I don't know all the details, but he's sort of ranking up there as like possibly one of the best chess players of all time. You think of Fischer, Kasparov, and now Carlsen is kind of how it is, as I understand it. And I'm not super into the whole chess realm, but I do know that all three of those guys have been tested, or not tested, but typed by IDR Labs. So that's how I know. That's how I know them. I know Fischer, Kasparov, and Carlsen because those are the chess players. I think there's another one, but I can't remember their name. Anyway. But at least my looking at them, like say with Carlsen, the interesting thing about Carlsen is that it has been said of him that his strategies and moves mirror what a computer would decide to do, and that's a part of why some people consider him one of the best chess champions of all time, because he literally is reaching up to be as good as a computer. He's not good despite a computer in the way that I think Kasparov kind of was, at least when he first Deep Blue and was able, the first time, if I understand right, he beat Deep Blue the first time because he exploited things in the programming, which he did not. Kasparov, because he would just do strange moves that the programming wasn't able to function, and then he was able to throw off the program, which is such... I might be wrong about this, but in my mind, like, that's such a TE-ish sort of thing to do, where it's like, no, I'm not going to try to process the rules faster than you. I'm just going to do what's most utilitarian for me to win the game. But the thing about Carlson, if I understand him right, is that he's more inclined, because he's IDR Labs types him as ISTP. I believe they originally had him as INTP, but the point is dominant TI, more theoretical form of thinking, and so he tends to mirror the computer more than just trying to defeat it. I'm sure I'm sure I don't have quite all of these details right, but you should look it up for yourself to see what precisely was going on. But I do think that ISTP is correct, given some of the statements he has made. Because I actually realized that there's a lot of elements to how Carlson plays chess, ironically to how I play chess, the difference being that he actually wins and I don't when we do them. But the similarity comes in the fact that, and I know this is definitely not all there is to Carlson, but it's been said that also a part of how he plays chess, and that's why it's kind of odd that some people have said that he mirrors the computer, but like some of the statements that he's made about how he plays don't seem to mirror the computer, because it's much more of, it's a tactical approach. And that's one of my main problems, is in a lot of games, is definitely not all games, but in a lot of games, I actually have trouble with I don't want to say I have trouble with true strategic thinking, but I'm certainly not as good as INTJs when the INTJ is really in their groove with strategic thinking, because they're much more utilitarian about it and stuff, but I'm more like, I relate more to Carlson's method because it's more tactical, in that he is... The notion that you would do a move because you know it will intimidate the other person and it will start to psych them out. I totally understand that. I totally get that. Or that the notion of playing hard and fast with chess and being much more focused on, like, it's so tempting for me. Like, what it's like in my mind, what I want to do is like put my pawn out and then like pawn queen movement, and this doesn't work because they're always going to block it, but like my instinct is I just put the pawn 2 spaces ahead, draw my queen out immediately, and then just like throw my queen right in front of the person's king. And then it gets taken, and it's like, well, crap, I don't have a queen anymore. But like, I want that aggression. I want that expression of aggression that just is like, pow, 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 3 moves instantly, like, I've already taken this thing out. But chess doesn't really work like that. There isn't that element of brute force that my inferior SE kind of wants when doing a game sometimes. So that's kind of the problem. But I understand and I really admire that notion. Like, there was an article that talked about Donald Trump and Donald Trump's strategy, if you could call it a strategy, because it wasn't a strategy, it was tactics. Because what it analyzed Donald Trump, and that what he was doing was comparable to, I can't remember who it was, but a particular World War II general or somebody, and the notion was that you rather than really strategizing, you simply interrupt the other person's feedback loop for their ability to process what's going on. So it's very psychological, and it's also very in the moment at the same time. And he was analyzing Donald Trump by showing how basically Donald Trump just goes in and doesn't do what people are expecting in terms of the political discourse. And he basically effectively, his theory was that part of why Donald Trump had managed to get so far was because there was no good opposition, and there was no good opposition because Donald Trump just he disrupted their ability to really fight back against him effectively, because he kept doing these crazy things and they literally didn't know how to respond to them. Because it's like, how can you say this in a political, how can you do that in a political discourse? And they would be trying to process that information, but right before they're about to really kind of have it click, he does another thing, and it disrupts them, and they're continually unable to figure out. And so in the military field, what it translates to is you making tactical, you sort of eyeballing tactical offensives or defensives that are not what the other person would psychologically expect you to do. The point being that there isn't actually a real method behind it per se. Its power lies in the fact that the other person is unable to discern what you're trying to accomplish. And thereby you mess up their way to, they're not able to focus, and you're then able to weasel out in real time where they leave themselves open and then strike. So you strike by making them flinch. And I understand that. I can't say that I'm very good at that, but I do appreciate the notion of ending a fight or ending a battle as quickly and as decisively as possible. You know the smallest number of moves that you can make that will throw the person off completely and will cause them to flinch. I relate and understand and appreciate that ISTP. It's a very ISTP mentality, but it also carries over to the ESTP. So I remember thinking to myself about Donald Trump, where I was like, why? The only question I had was, why has it taken it so long for this to happen? Like, because all I remember being a kid was people complaining about politicians and how they complaining about politicians, and in my mind, what they were really complaining about was that they felt the politicians weren't really people, or that they were so remote and distant and didn't care, or, that they weren't honest, or they didn't feel honest because they weren't direct. And I'm like, okay, well, if I were to run for president, I would make my platform, I'm just going to be ultra upfront about everything. And that's not, that, by the way, that is not that's not what Trump is doing, at least not directly, but he's at least he's doing a very good job of giving people that sense that he just doesn't care and he's just saying things, and he just keeps rolling forward. And I don't want to say, actually, it's not I don't want to say, but I don't think that's a good thing at all. But I feel like there's elements of the principle behind it that I understand. And if you had someone who had, a bit more, I don't know, I shouldn't be talking about politics, but frankly, with Trump, I think it's kind of, people understand why people don't like him. So I think it's fine for me to basically say that I'm rather concerned. I don't express it very much because I don't really know what to do about it, but but if anything, I'm mainly concerned by the lack of any morality in the man, and the fact that he's not actually telling the truth. He's just seems like it be through by the means of being ESTP style straightforward, like a Winston Churchill. But Winston Churchill, as far as I know, actually was more telling the truth, and also had some more moral scruples to him. But, I'd need to study some more about Mr. Churchill. But I do think that is a thing to keep in mind. So, yeah, that all somehow had to do with chess. But I do think that, like I was saying with Carlson, it's a very ISTP way of playing chess. So I totally think that there's a connection. Could you give us your thought? This is GNPHDC2. Jinping2. Give us your thoughts about male INFJ in relationship with female ESTJ. What comes to mind in terms of that match? Things to move forward, things to avoid. I have never met a pair like that. A romantic pair where it's a male INFJ with a female ESTJ, or even just regardless of the gender. I've never seen that. I have seen INFJs and ESTJs together, and I have been with, not romantically, but I've worked with ESTJs. So first things that come to mind is that to me would seem to be it would be a very difficult relationship. It would be a relationship characterized by typology continually reasserting itself as an important factor. Namely the fact that these two types struggle to understand each other, but even more deeply than that, even if they understand each other, they aren't going to agree with each other. And that's sort of the more important thing. So it's odd because the ESTJs who I've observed or have met, I do think that one of the socionics people, I have no idea who it was, I can't differentiate them, but I had read in socionics, and I talked about in the conflict video, the socionics conflict relation video, how the different the conflict types tend to actually find each other more attractive at first than they would their dual partner, the ESTP. That there's more respect there at first, and that it's only as they start to have to work together more that the problems come out, as more and more things are said. But so I could see that happening in INFJ and an ESTJ is sort of getting together and trying to make it work. The problem is that I'm trying to think of the relationships I've had with ESTJs, work relationships. I struggle to... The main struggle, because there's an ESTJ woman who was rather older than me. She had kids. But we had never had to really work together on anything. And so we had maintained, by virtue of our psychological distance, we had maintained a respect for each other because we didn't see each other's methods, right? But we saw the results, and we liked the results because we already had shared meanings. We're both Mormon. We were both trying to do, going with those meanings and values and trying to exemplify them. So we saw the results, but